In this episode of the Omega Podcast, executive coach Darren Kanthal, founder of the Kanthal Group, shares valuable insights to help leaders elevate their mindset. With credentials like PCC, CPCC, and DISC, and experience working with top brands such as Verizon, Four Seasons, and Capital One, Darren offers practical strategies for impactful leadership.
Welcome to the Omega Podcast with Darren Kanthal, the CEO and executive coach of the Kanthal Group. Thank you so much for being with us, Darren.
Thank you, Keenan.
Well, I am super excited about our conversation about leadership, the upward trajectory for those that are interested in higher roles within their existing corporations or organizations, but also to shed light in such a volatile time when it comes to being a leader in these crises, if you would like to put it. But before we get into all of the details of our conversation, it would be great if you could unpack for our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a born and raised New Yorker. And when I do my spiel with new clients, I always say that I resonate with my New York self. I talk fast. I raise my voice when I'm not angry. I curse, which I will not do here today. And I do exhibit some stereotypical New York traits. I'm the oldest of three. My father passed away in 1997. My mom is a retired teacher. I spent almost 20 years in corporate HR. And interestingly, for my job today as an executive coach, who knew that 20 years of corporate HR would have been the real world training ground that gives me some context and perspective today. In 2018, I left corporate, started my business. And really the best decision I've made. I learned a long time ago that I don't necessarily like working for other people. And it's not so much the working for other people that was bothersome. It was them telling me without much buy-in or much conversation what success looked like, how we were going to prove ourselves. Yeah, like it really often in my career was not so much a collaborative discussion and more of a top-down approach of them declaring and then stating to me what was going to be. And as a self-respecting New Yorker, right, opinions are important. We share them. I share them. And that didn't always work so well for me. It was kind of like oil and water.
For sure. And I know when it comes to having those types of dynamics, it can be very difficult to kind of tiptoe around, how are people going to think? How are they going to react? And it's really challenging to really, be yourself, open up and just be real with what you believe and standing up for what you believe in. So I can definitely resonate there. And I'm sure many of our listeners can do the same. But for many of our listeners, they are leaders of organizations, of corporations across the globe, from small to mid-sized corporations to even large enterprises. And being a leader has so many different definitions and there's so many different approaches to leadership. But what does being a leader mean to you, Darren?
And that's a broad question, Keenan. Man, all right, what does being a leader mean to me? It means that, let me just think for a sec before I put my foot in my mouth. I don't know that I've been asked that question in quite a while. All right, so I'm just thinking about my career and I have my two hands up, right? Left hand, I had a number of poor, ineffective leaders, and on the right hand were the effective leaders. So just this duality. I think leadership is treating people with respect and dignity. I think it is treating people as adults. I think it is setting clear expectations, success measures, what we're trying to accomplish, and allowing the adults to do their job. I think it is removing obstacles when they exist. I think it is providing real-time, constructive, direct, clear feedback in the moments they are required. The flip side to that is not letting things linger. I believe it is a requirement of a leader to have performance-related discussions regularly. I think it's a requirement of leaders to show and display what effective conflict resolution looks like. I think it's a requirement of leadership to allow for debate, discussion, disagreement. I think it's allowing people to have a voice and then ultimately declaring who has the decision-making authority and making it, even when it may be in contrast to what everybody else is saying. And I'm pointing to myself. I think about some of the best leaders who gave me a voice, allowed me to debate. I was not fearful of retribution or retaliation because I disagreed, and respecting the decision of the leader. So I think a leader's got to do all of those things. Set the course correct when necessary, give the pats on the back when required, but also, I don't know what the opposite of a pat on the back is, but letting people know when they've not met expectations and giving them that direct feedback.
Right. So you're almost having to have multiple hats. You're the encourager, the motivator, but you're also someone who has to be the disciplinary individual or someone that's going to tell people, hey, you're out of bounds. How do you get back inside within the scheme of what we're trying to accomplish via goals, objectives of the organization. But for some leaders, they have a difficulty of even reaching that particular scope because they don't do enough self-reflection. How do you think self-reflection can help leaders identify their internal insecurities and fears?
Let me just go backwards and I'll come forward and answer that question. I had an early mentor of mine who was a senior leader at a Fortune 100 company. And he said, the best leaders are the most bored. And what he meant by that was when you are a great leader, you have great people below you. You're not in their soup. You're not micromanaging them. You're not up their butt. You're allowing them to be the leader they are because you're treating them like adults. So I just want to put that little quip out there. Self-reflection. Anyone here listening that knows more about neuroscience than I do, please check me. Please email myself or Keenan and keep us honest. My understanding of neuroscience is that we can reprogram our brains simply by reflection. I've even heard it be said that our brain is not smart enough, believe it or not, to know the difference between an actual experience and one that we've made up. I'm blown away by that whole thought. But pulling that thread, the power of self-reflection is in the reprogramming of our brain. I'll speak for myself. Earlier in my career, and still to this day, when I get triggered or I get hijacked, I go on the attack. I raise my voice in anger. I'm very pointed. I'm clipped in my communication. And honestly, more times than not, I have to go back and apologize for what I've said, done, behaved, or acted. The reflection is in rethinking that very experience and reimagining a better response. I see the trigger come in. I reflect on how I process it in that split moment. Instead of getting triggered, I think about a more positive response, and then I play that out. So the self-reflection is essential, from my understanding of neuroscience, to reprogram auto responses, knee-jerk responses, triggers, hijacks, etc. And self-reflection helps us to think about, am I proud of that way I've acted or behaved? Am I not? Did I get the response I wanted? Did I get the outcome I wanted? And then how might I do it differently next time?
That's fantastic. I think the fact that you're able to recognize when you're triggered and then be able to take the necessary approaches to acknowledge why you're being triggered and then be able to funnel that energy into, okay, how am I going to create the most appropriate response in that time? Because I think throughout our days as leaders, we have different triggers that happen. There's not a deliverable that's done. There's a client that's not happy. This happens. There's so much that comes in throughout our day that sometimes by the end of the day, it can be this depletion of energy and just not being able to allocate our stress in the most appropriate way. So I think the tools that you shared regarding kind of the neuroplasticity and being able to acknowledge kind of what works and what doesn't work on both sides of the brain. But one thing that I really appreciate that you mentioned was acknowledging your stressors and triggers. So what techniques do you believe are most effective for leaders to mitigate their internal stressors and triggers? So you mentioned, we can acknowledge when it's coming, but how do we then internalize it and then create the best course of action in real time? Because these emotions are happening very quickly for us. And it's not necessarily easy to then have the correct approach moving forward. So I don't know if you have any approaches or tricks that can help.
I do. All right. So the first one, I think everyone is capable of, with or without any sort of training. And that is the moment you realize you've been triggered and you're reacting or behaving from that trigger, you stop. What I mean by that is this. There have been many times that I got triggered and responded from a place of anger, which is my default negative emotion. And underneath anger is irritation, impatience, annoyance, those types of things. There have been many an instance, current, more so in the past, where I was triggered and then I responded from that place of a trigger. And then once I was down the course of action, I realized this is probably not my best course. But my brain convinced me, or I convinced myself, that I'm already on the course, so follow through. Nowadays, when I catch that trigger or that behavior, I will sometimes stop in the moment and say, Keenan, I'm sorry. I just responded from a place of a trigger. This is not the way I want to show up. Will you offer me grace? Will you forgive me? And then we change the conversation. So that's one trick. Like as soon as you notice, stop. Now, with that being said is, often we've got to do it with people we trust, people we don't think are going to retaliate. Often it happens at home. Friends, family members, spouse, kids, etc. So that's trick one, stop in the moment. Two, the way that I was initially taught, and it was only about 5 years ago. So I'm going to be 50 this year. At 45 years old is when I first started to learn like real effective conflict resolution, is by practicing mindfulness. And maybe it's hokey, maybe it's not. People can decide for themselves. But the way I was taught mindfulness was to literally, over the course of time, have this cascading effect where in these little 2-minute clips, I sit and I focus on senses. What do I see, hear, touch, taste, or smell? And it could be something as simple as I have all these tchotchkes on my desk. I'm holding a wiffle ball right here. So sometimes I will just feel the holes of the ball and I'm focused on the holes of the ball. And quite frankly, sometimes the way I throw it to make it curve or go fast or whatever. But the idea is to try to get out of my brain and stop ruminating on the thought and focus on the sensation of this ball. And if I do that effectively, the way I was taught neuroscience and mindfulness is you can't concentrate on the ball and the thought process. One or the other is going to win. And so if I focus on the ball, then I'm neutralizing my brain. Hopefully then I de-escalate, de-trigger, and with better senses, a better sense of mind, maybe then I'm like, do I really want to blow up a Keenan right now? Do I think he was really trying to hurt me? Is it possible that this was just a mistake, whatever the thing was that I'm triggered by? And so that's a whole different train of thought. So those are the two tricks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And there's something that you mentioned is honesty, really being honest with yourself and finding the right people within your team, within your family that you can just be brutally honest with and just share exactly what's going on, because there's something about really relaying how you truly feel with a spouse, a significant other, that really helps de-escalate those emotions and gives you another train of thought or another perspective that perhaps you didn't have in the heat of the moment. But when it comes to that aspect of vulnerability, how can a leader's self-awareness impact their communication style within their team? I mean, you mentioned about transparency and honesty, but how does that translate or maybe matriculate into the team dynamic?
What I firmly believe is we need to know ourselves better than we do today. The two things that I particularly focus on with my clients and also myself is, number one, what is the conversation in my brain? Now, you can nod because I can see you, or if you want to come off mute, I'm asking you literally, Keenan, do you have internal dialogue? Do you talk to yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
In a healthy way.
For me, sometimes it's not so healthy. Mm-hmm. And for many of the people I know, personally and professionally, sometimes they don't speak to themselves in a healthy way. As a quick little sidebar, I've done a little bit of research on the topic, and depending on what data set you look at, some data suggests 50% of the population does not talk to themselves, does not have internal dialogue. I'm blown away by it. In my travels, I would say it's more like 90% do have internal dialogue. Where I'm going with this is enough people that I know at times have negative internal dialogue. It is some sort of judgment about themselves, or it's a judgment about their team. And when they lean into those judgments, they often go down paths of accusations, defensiveness, assuming negative intent, as if you tried to hurt me, you tried to sabotage this project, you messed up on purpose, which, let's be honest, who really does that? Like, unless you're a narcissist, people don't do that deliberately. So the first thing about self-awareness is, what are the conversations in your brain? Tied to that, often enough, is what are the unanswered questions? What I find is that a lot of leaders have unanswered questions about status, what you're doing all day long, how you're spending your time, why you've made this mistake 17 times, whatever's unknown, risks and issues we're trying to mitigate. Bottom line is we have a lot of curiosities, and in my travels, a lot of people don't talk about them. That's number one. What's going on in your brain? The second part is, in my travels again, most people have a poor emotional vocabulary. I'll speak for myself. Earlier in my life, I knew I was either angry or happy. That was it. And that was the joke about me. Well, come to find out is there's a wide range of emotion. My anger was often a mask for insecurity. Now, when I feel insecure, what do you think the conversation in my brain is? Darren, you are unworthy. Keenan knows it. He's poking at you on purpose. So now you have to defend yourself. And if I do that, I'm going to attack you, Keenan, because it feels better for me to attack you than allow you to start pushing on my nerve. This is what I watch play out all the time. personally and professionally. So self-awareness to me is knowing yourself from a what's the conversation in my brain standpoint and how am I doing, i.e. how am I feeling in the moment? And I would say the third thing is having the courage and the bravery to say, Keenan, I'm feeling triggered. I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling unsure or uncertain or whatever the emotion is. And starting with an I statement as opposed to, Keenan, you made me feel this way, which then automatically puts us both on the defensive.
Enjoying this episode of the Omega Podcast? We want to hear from you. Please share your thoughts or feedback in the comments. You can also visit omegaconsulting.online for more resources, insights, and industry updates. Let's get back to this executive conversation.
No, for sure. And I think that that's really important to have that internal dialogue that we can have with ourselves to recognize, again, going back to our triggers, because, the reason why it's so important for leaders to be acknowledging that is I think it affects the productivity of our teams. It's definitely going to, have some sort of impact in the overall corporate environment. When people come to work, are they at ease? Are they going to be coming in, kind of tiptoeing in? Are you going to explode? What are the dynamics and how does that really impact the day-to-day deliverables that our clients, our community, our stakeholders are going to be feeling from these, individual interactions that we have. But just something that I wanted to make sure that we zero in on a bit more is just about the dynamics of teams, because, leaders that are acknowledging, their insecurities, their trials and tribulations, and maybe things that they like and dislike, again, that's going to definitely impact their teams. But in your opinion, how does self-mastery contribute to effective delegation and conflict resolution among leaders?
Yeah, I'm glad you came back to it. I got a little bit caught up in the narrative about the self, right?
Yeah, it's
you're hitting the nail.
Though.
Yes, and you're hitting the nail on the head. I would encourage you, Keenan, and everyone listening to think about their career and think about the leader or leaders, plural, who acted in such a way that puts you at odds or puts you in the defensive or increase the conversations you had about how is this leader going to show up today? Am I going to get my head ripped off? Are they going to be in a good mood or a bad mood or whatever? I often think about this cascading effect on the positive and the negative. If I am the greatest leader of all time, then I believe the cascading effect is other people are going to pick up what I'm putting down. I'm going to positively teach, coach, lead those leaders below me that maybe exhibit less than ideal behaviors, and they're going to trickle down. It's going to be this cascading effect. On the flip side is I've worked for what I believe to be poor leaders, and I've watched how their poor leadership permeated the team, whether it was lower level leaders emulating that poor leadership or instilling fear, doubt, uncertainty, fill in the blank. When I have worked for poor leaders, I protected myself. Maybe I didn't communicate as clearly. Maybe I gave one-word answers just to protect myself from criticism that I felt was incessant or whatever, unwarranted. I communicated just facts without much context behind it. Bottom line is I didn't perform at my best because I was fearful of what this leader was going to do. My firm belief is if you are exhibiting poor behavior, temper tantrums, whatever it is, your team is going to suffer. Does that mean you won't succeed? No, not necessarily, but it kind of falls into the biting off your nose to spite your face category, right? We may succeed, but in spite of your poor leadership, we might only achieve the very tangible goal as opposed to thinking broadly. It falls into what I believe is the order takers. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I'll do exactly what you said, as opposed to the collaborative brainstorming team that takes the idea from the leader, has open discussion, and the idea gets bigger and better, and we achieve even greater.
That is so good, Darren. And something that I believe every single person, if you have a notebook and pen, please write this down, is that you said, what type of leader do you want to be? You watched other leaders and how they were treating their dynamics, their teams, their productivity, and it made you assess, you know what, I don't want those particular traits. I don't want to be like that. This is the type of leadership or type of leader that I desire to be. And that's so crucial because people go into these particular fields and think, hey, I'm just going to be this because that's what I'm accustomed to. But no, you can look across a broad spectrum. You can go even outside of your industry vertical and see what are some great leaders in the business realm, political realm, if you will, and see what are particular traits that are working, what's not working, that perhaps that you can adopt as a leader. But one thing, Darren, you're taking everything right out of my mouth, and I really, really love this conversation, is the essence of mentorship. In what ways can mentorship help leaders navigate their internal struggles? I know we talked about earlier about conversation, but how deep can that go?
When my father died in 97, there was never another male that I allowed to be a father figure or someone that I would even allow to be a mentor. Like my dad was it. And so for, 20 years, I kind of flubbed my way through life, business and otherwise. The reason I bring that up is because there were some mentors, and they were older male, that I allowed in. And the power of that mentorship was I allowed them to deliver messages that no one else but my father ever delivered, and I heard them, such as like the direct, what are you doing? You're making yourself act and look like the fool with this behavior. And the reason I share that is because the power of a mentor is they can point out things to you from experience. As the mentee, you have to be willing to hear the message from them. Whether you're a mentee or not, is if you have a messenger delivering you messages and you're not willing to hear it, you're going to discredit their feedback. You're going to convince yourself that what they're sharing is invalid, and you're going to continue with poor behavior and poor action, which is my story. So the power of mentor is so deep and wide. It is you allowing them in. It's allowing yourself to hear their message. It is allowing yourself to realize you are fallible and that you are imperfect and you don't know it all. This is me speaking to my younger self. It's recognizing that chip on your shoulders does not need to be as strong or as big as it is. And it's recognizing you will improve faster when you allow people to teach you based upon experience. It's the whole why reinvent the wheel, right? Everyone older than us, well, maybe not everyone, but most older than us have wisdom simply by experience. They've lived longer. They've seen more. Sorry, real quick it took me a long time to allow some of these people in. And nowadays I'm more willing to allow these messengers to deliver these messages because I don't know it all.
Yeah, I really appreciate this because I think leadership in totality, many people feel that they have to have all the answers. They have to have it all together. They have to look like they have to have it all together. And I understand why, right? Because you're leading people. If you're a leader who's crying in the corner, you're having mental breakdowns, anxiety attacks. Now, mind you, people still do that. And I'm not saying that as a negative, but I think it's definitely going to be difficult for people who are working under you to have their full trust based upon those particular components. But I love what you mentioned about just not going at it alone, not feeling as though that you're going at being a leader alone. And, many of the people listening to our conversation are Fortune 500 leaders, small business leaders. How can the organization or maybe the businesses that they have established or started kind of support them in those aspects of being the best leader? Is it being able to provide that real-time feedback to their manager or to their director? Or is it having that mentorship that someone outside of your day-to-day operations can be able to look down and say, okay, these are some of the areas that I've recognized that have been helpful and maybe not be? Because for me personally, we have an advisory board at Omega Consulting, and many of the people on the advisory board don't work at Omega Consulting. They have external experience, but we have a conversation as to what's happening, and we kind of do like a circle, as to what things are working, what things are not. But for some, that may not be helpful. I don't know if you have any ideas for how organizations can help support the leaders that they have at the top.
Well, of course I'm biased because I'm an executive coach, so I think everyone should have one, right?
Absolutely.
But moving past that shameless plug, I think it's a multifaceted approach or thing. One is whether it's spoken or it's just known, like what is the culture of the company? And what I mean by this is I have worked for some companies that chastised mistakes. And what the culture of the company was instilling was a sense of perfection that I don't think is possible to attain. So if that's your environment, then I don't really know what you do, to be honest. I think you gotta have leaders at the top that are willing to say, no, we have to buck this culture and change it. So let's just put that culture aside. And let's say we have a culture of open-mindedness, growth orientation, we allow mistakes to occur, et cetera. I think the first thing that every leader can start to do is to stop immediately solving everybody's problem. There is this, I don't know, dare I say movement, or at least, some articles online about quote unquote leading as a coach. And in essence, what that means is ask questions first. There is a adage amongst us coaches, which is ask, don't tell. So it's the age old where employee comes to leader and says, hey boss, I don't know how to solve this problem, solve it for me. And as humans, we love to solve people's problems. So we say, okay, direct report, here's what you should do, which is an old kind of like rank and file or top-down approach. Where I'm going with this is, I think the first evolution is for the leader to say, okay, direct report, how would you suggest we solve this problem? Talk it through with me. A lot of times people will say, I don't know. Fine. I'm not asking you to know. I'm just saying, let's brainstorm. How would you even start? What are your thoughts? I'm sure you have a thought process. Almost everybody does. So that's the first evolution. And I think that starts from the very, very top all the way down to the very bottom. And it's irrespective of title, right? To your point with your advisory board, maybe it's not so much how would you solve this, but maybe it's more about, hey, from your outside experiences and your life experiences, can we talk through this problem that I have? Or can we dissect this situation that I've had? And let's see how I might have handled it differently. That's also coaching. So this whole idea of leading as a coach. Two is, I think, being very open about what we do with mistakes, right? Some people say, hey, I believe in trial and error until we have error, right? We like to try, but then we expect to solve. And I think that's an error in and of itself. So if we are a trial and error environment, lean into the errors. Right? It's science 101. I work with some scientists, and part of the experiment is validating or invalidating hypotheses. And the only way we do that is by failing or solving. So it's leaning into the quote unquote failure. And failure is such a big word. Like, I don't think a mistake is a failure. It's just a misstep. So what do we do with it? I've heard this story before that, with children, right? If they are learning to ride a bicycle and they fall off the bike, you don't scream and yell at them and call them a failure, right? You say, okay, brush off your knees. Are you okay? What happened? Let me show you. Let's try again, right? We offer a lot of grace and teaching moments with children with whatever reason, but with adults, it's almost like we lose that. So I don't know, maybe I got a little bit long in my narrative, but I think it's the idea of embracing mistakes, offering them as teaching moments, not a time to punish unless it's repeated over and over and over again. But I think it's those two things, is leading as the coach, leaning into mistakes and learning from them.
Perfect. And that's actually what's going to be my follow-up question in regards to what are some of the misconceptions of being a leader? And I think you already touched upon that.
I think you hit on one of the biggest, to be quite honest, is a lot of leaders at the C-level and on down believe that they need to have all of the answers. And somewhere along the way, they were taught that I don't know is a bad statement. And I firmly disagree with that. Right? I mean, if we think about just the evolution of the world with AI and technology and humans and work from home or remote and blah, 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 like there is so much going on that not one human, in my opinion, has all of the answers. And I think it's the leader that leads into humanity that says, you know what, I'm not quite sure. Let's talk it through. I think that is coming back to, I think the misconception is leaders don't need to have all the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, hey, I've got the final decision and I'm curious what you think. I think a misconception is that we need to check our emotions at the door. If I was cursing, I would use a curse word, but I think it's nonsense, right? We are humans. Every human is a son, daughter, friend, mom, dad, fill in the blank. And I don't know about you, Keenan, but if I'm having a disagreement or an argument with my partner and I come in, I'm thinking about her, no doubt, right? I am affected. There's no checking those emotions at the door, right? I'm consumed with this argument, usually. So trying to pretend like I'm not is absurd, right? If we're colleagues and you say, how you doing? Keenan, you know what? I had an argument with Rachel today and I'm pretty upset about it. Like, imagine what kind of conversation you and I are going to have because we're relating as humans. And so I think that's the other misperception, is like somehow the professional aspect of us is like separate from the human or personal side. We're integrated. We're whole beings. And so I think ignoring one side or the other is fallacy. I think it's ridiculous. Does So I think that's another misperception.
Yeah, it's like almost as if you're trying to suppress your emotions, you know, and I don't mean to get too dark, but then you hear horror stories of people, taking their life or, doing things to harm themselves because they have no outlet. They don't have anyone that has with that camaraderie, that they can be able to open up and share. And it's so important, especially with this high intense environment that we're constantly scrutinized, constantly kind of like at each other's whim because anything is happening. And in the environment that we're currently in, nothing is finite. Nothing is just permanent, unless, you're God or something, and then everything is. But I think the point that I'm trying to get at here is just, it's so important to have that relationship with yourself, have those individuals around you that can be able to kind of reach in and kind of pull you up when you're down. But more importantly, it's having an executive coach, like Darren, that can be able to come in and encourage you to kind of give you those, I would like to call those rear view mirrors, to kind of see where you've come from and also to where you're going. So it's so crucial. But as we sort of wrap up our conversation, Darren, are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave our listeners with?
And I've been a podcast host. I asked that question too, and now I'm on the receiving end. It's a hard question. It's a good one.
It's a great question.
Yeah. Here's what I think. From a leadership perspective, not that I'm well versed on data. However, what I've read, learned, experienced is that we want to feel as if you care about me. And if there's nothing else leaders do is show that you give a damn about the people who work for you. A simple good morning, how are you? Knowing the names of the people in their lives, children and spouses, partners, whoever. It's recognizing that if you told me you were going on a weekend trip, that on Monday I ask you about the weekend trip, right? It's asking how you're doing and caring what the answer is. I think all of the tactics and concepts and theories, et cetera, we're each going to apply our own. I often say it to prospects, which is if you talk to any certified coach, we have to believe we have a similar skill set and each of us are going to apply it in our unique way. So for you, the prospect, you got to decide whose application you like the most. I think the same is true for leadership, whether you're a servant leader, rank and file leadership, authoritarian leadership, the theories are out there, you're going to apply them. But how you do it and how you relate to your people and the results you get is unique to you. And so if you care about the people that you work with, you're going to show that care. And I think that's the number one thing that I don't want to say is missing. I don't think that's a fair statement. But what I would leave our listeners with is, are you showing apt care for the people you work with? And if not, why?
Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you so much for being on the Omega Podcast.
Thank you, Ken. This is awesome, man. I appreciate it.